This all happened just a couple of weeks into summer. I had just graduated high school, stepping into that strange, beautiful window of life where, for the first time in years, you don't have any real responsibilities, no homework, no job lined up yet. No one expecting you to be anywhere, just freedom. And honestly, I was soaking it in with everything I had. People always say the start of summer is the best part of the year, and they're right. There's this electricity in the air, a kind of excitement that anything could happen. Every day feels like the beginning of an adventure. In Montana, there's this thing my school always did. I don't know if other schools had the same tradition, but for us, it was like a rite of passage. As soon as you graduate, you and your closest friends are supposed to head out into the wide-open plateaus and go rock climbing. It wasn't official, but it was our way of saying, we're adults now, and we're brave enough to prove it. My friends and I had been talking about it for weeks. Finally, the day came. It was me, Maya, Jordan, and Chris. The four of us had been inseparable since middle school, and this trip felt like the perfect send-off before life started pulling us in different directions. Maya was the driver. She was the only one with a reliable car, an old Jeep that she loved more than anything. She never drank, so it was understood she'd stay sober while the rest of us celebrated with a couple of beers once we got to the top. It was a perfect setup. The Jeep, the freedom of the open road, and a day with people I'd grown up with. We started with a lookout spot everyone always talked about. When we got there, it was breathtaking, one of those views that makes you stop talking and just stare. Endless stretches of green, broken by red cliffs and winding rivers. We spent an hour there, laughing, taking pictures, and just soaking in the fact that summer had finally begun. Eventually, we got back on the road, windows down, music blasting, and kept our eyes open for a spot to climb. That's when we saw it, a rock formation off Highway 141. Not too steep, not too easy. Just right. Maya pulled into a small gravel lot. We strapped on our backpacks and started to climb. She went first. She had the most experience than me, Jordan, and Chris bringing up the rear. 15 minutes later, we were sitting at the top. Sweaty, tired, but exhilarated. The view stretched forever. We cracked open our beers and just sat there, talking about random stuff, the kind of conversations you only have when you feel untouchable. And then, things changed. I noticed movement on the highway below. A red pickup truck tore down the road, far faster than it should have been going. At first, I didn't think much of it until it screeched to a halt, reversed right there in the middle of the road, and swung into the gravel lot where Maya's Jeep was parked. My stomach dropped. A man stepped out. From our distance, we could only make out his shape, tall, broad-shouldered, but something about the way he carried himself sent a chill through me. He didn't look like a hiker. He didn't look like someone out to stretch his legs. He circled Maya's Jeep, pulling on the handles, peering through the windows. It was obvious he was trying to get inside. Jordan stood up and shouted down, "Hey." Just to make it clear, the car wasn't abandoned. The man startled, looked around, and finally spotted us up on the plateau. And then, he did something strange. He smiled and waved, like this was normal. Like we were just neighbors meeting and passing. For a second, I thought that was it, that he'd leave, but he didn't. He went right back to trying to get into the Jeep. Chris, maybe trying to scare him off, yelled down, "We're armed." It was a bluff. None of us had so much as a pocket knife. But the man only smirked. He shouted back, "Me too, kid," and then raised something in the air. From that distance, it was hard to make out, but it looked an awful lot like a gun. The blood drained from my face. What happened next felt unreal. The man drove his elbow into the Jeep's window again and again until it shattered. The sound carried all the way up to us. We started screaming, scrambling down the rocks faster than I thought was possible. By the time our feet hit the gravel, we sprinted across the lot, yelling at him to back off. That's when he turned, aimed the gun straight at us, and shouted for us to stop. I'll never forget that moment, the way my legs locked, My breath caught, and my body just froze in place. We raised our hands, terrified. "Throw your phones and wallets on the ground," he barked. His voice was sharp, commanding, and we didn't hesitate. As I got closer, I saw him clearly. He was older, maybe mid-50s, with a scraggly beard and weathered skin, nothing distinctive. Just the kind of face that could blend in anywhere, which made it worse because I knew I'd never be able to pick him out of a crowd. He scooped up our stuff, pulled out a knife, and stabbed it into one of Maya's tires like it was nothing. Then he walked back to his truck. No plates, no hesitation. Just silence as he drove away, leaving us stranded. Maya was shaking with rage. That Jeep was her pride and joy, and this stranger had not only broken into it, but humiliated us in the process. Me, I was still trembling from the gun. I couldn't stop picturing the barrel aimed at my chest. We swapped the tire as fast as we could, but we knew chasing him down was useless. By the time we made it back to Maya's house, the adrenaline had worn off, replaced with exhaustion and dread. We called the police from her mom's phone, gave them everything we could remember, but without plates, without details, there wasn't much they could do. And that was it. No follow-up, no arrest. The guy disappeared into the void. That day should have been one of the highlights of our summer. Instead, it became a story that never really leaves me. A memory that taught me just how fast a perfect day can spiral into a nightmare. Now, whenever I'm out in the wild driving down some empty road, hiking a trail that feels a little too isolated, I think about that man. About how quickly he appeared, how easily he disappeared, and how, in that moment, the wilderness felt a little less free. My name is Ava, and this happened about 3 years ago when I was 19. My older brother, Ethan, had just finished college in California, and the two of us were driving all the way back home to New Jersey. Since he'd been living out west for 4 years, Ethan had collected an entire apartment's worth of furniture, electronics, books, basically everything. There was no way he could just hop on a plane with all that. But honestly, the main reason wasn't the stuff, a cross-country road trip I was in. For me, this felt more like a dream summer vacation than just a long drive. We could have taken the direct northern route through Nevada and Colorado, but Ethan wanted to explore more of the country he'd only read about, and I had never seen places like Zion or the Grand Canyon either. So, we mapped out the southern route, the scenic one. Ethan rented a U-Haul instead of shipping things or starting fresh back home. Typical recent graduate move, saving every dollar possible. The truck wasn't massive, but it was big enough that I felt like we were hauling a tiny moving van across the desert. Before we left, everyone warned us about one thing. Be careful in New Mexico. Not that the whole state was dangerous, but apparently scams, shady towns, and unsettling encounters weren't uncommon out there. Our dad had drilled it into us: don't stop unless it's urgent. And if you do, stick to big gas stations and get right back on the highway. Ethan and I agreed we'd fill up in Arizona, drive through without stopping, and refuel again in Texas. Solid plan, or so we thought. The first part of the trip was amazing. Zion blew me away. The Grand Canyon was everything I'd imagined, and Arizona's landscapes were far more beautiful than I expected. But somewhere deep in New Mexico, our plan unraveled. The U-Haul was guzzling gas way faster than Ethan had calculated, and the tank was dipping quicker than we liked. Turns out, assuming we could cross the entire state on one tank was a bit naive. The GPS showed the next station was 40 miles ahead, but the gauge was already below a quarter. Ethan's jaw tightened. He wasn't sure we'd make it. We spotted a tiny town about 10 miles up ahead, with a gas station marked on the GPS. It wasn't ideal, but better than being stranded in the middle of nowhere. The town itself looked forgotten, quiet, empty streets, a handful of worn-down buildings. It had that eerie desert stillness, like everyone was hiding indoors. We didn't even see other cars passing through, which was odd, considering how close we were to a major highway. The gas station was small, just a couple of pumps and a dusty convenience store. As Ethan filled the tank, I noticed locals staring, not in an aggressive way, but long, unsettling looks that made my skin crawl. A man leaning against the store, smoking a cigarette, kept locking eyes with me. I forced myself to look away, telling myself we just stood out of towners in a U-Haul with California plates. Once the tank was full, I tried to guide us back to the highway. Easy, right? We could see the highway from parts of town. But every street we took curved away, dead-ended, or dumped us somewhere else entirely. It was maddening, like the town was a maze designed to keep us in, and the GPS, useless. The maps were outdated, taking us down roads that didn't exist, and the signal kept cutting in and out. We circled the same blocks again and again. My chest tightened with every wrong turn. Ethan stayed calm on the outside, but I could see frustration and something darker creeping in. It didn't feel natural anymore. It felt like we weren't supposed to leave. After 20 minutes of this, Ethan snapped. He drove us back to the station to ask for directions. I begged him not to, but he was at his breaking point. We're trapped in the one place we were told not to stop, he shouted, and I shut up after that. He came back with this worried look. The clerk had given him directions, but they made no sense. 17 miles in the opposite direction, down back roads, before looping back to an on-ramp. I stared at Ethan like he was joking. Why take a roundabout desert detour when the highway was literally in sight? Ethan admitted he didn't trust it. The guy had seemed friendly but too confident, too insistent. And he asked Ethan way too many questions about where we were going and how long we'd be on the road. Ethan muttered, "We need to get the hell out of here," and started driving aimlessly again. Then it got worse. A dusty pickup truck pulled up beside us on a side street. My stomach dropped. Ethan's hand hovered like he was ready to floor it. The driver rolled down his window and asked if we were lost. Ethan hesitated, then admitted we were trying to reach the highway. He even repeated the clerk's directions. That's when the man's tone shifted. Serious, almost alarmed. He told us point-blank not to follow that route. It led straight into a desolate area known for drug trafficking. You don't want to go there, he warned. Then he gave us alternate directions, saying it was a miracle we hadn't already been robbed, sticking out in a U-Haul like we did. Before we could thank him, he drove off. We followed his route, and sure enough, about a mile outside town, we found a gravel road so hidden you'd miss it if you blinked. It was convoluted and strange, but eventually, it spat us back onto the highway. Just like that, we were free. Ethan and I didn't talk much after. We didn't need to. That suffocating dread, like being trapped in a limbo between danger and escape, is not something I'll ever forget. Even now, years later, I never want to feel that way again. It all started 5 summers ago. Back then, I was with a girl named Marina. We aren't together anymore, but there's no resentment in that. If anything, I still think of her as one of the strongest, most stubborn, and fearless people I've ever known. Marina was half Brazilian, half Croatian, this blend of warmth and fire that made her the kind of person you couldn't ignore. She was passionate, determined, and when she set her mind on something, there was no talking her out of it. Back in college, we'd made a promise to each other. After graduation, we wouldn't jump straight into jobs or responsibilities. We'd take a trip across Europe. A real adventure. One of those once-in-a-lifetime things you look back on when you're old. And Marina, being Marina, wasn't going to let that promise die. The problem, we were broke. Not we'll have to be careful, broke, flat out, scraping by broke. So, we planned our trip on the tightest shoestring budget imaginable. Cheap Airbnbs with one blurry photo. Guest houses where the paint peeled from the walls. And hostels so old the beds creaked if you even breathed on them. But you know what? None of that mattered. We were young. We were in love. We had backpacks, open train tickets, and this reckless excitement that made every bad meal and broken down room feel like part of the adventure. Our route was ambitious. A week in Croatia, finishing with tonight's in a small coastal city called Vereno, where Marina's grandparents had once lived. She'd grown up hearing stories about that place, but she'd never actually seen it. I could tell it wasn't just another stop for her, it was personal. The first days were everything we wanted. Zagreb was buzzing, colorful, alive. Dubrovnik was beautiful beyond words. Even with the crowds of tourists, every photo felt like a postcard. But Vereno was different. It wasn't a tourist hub. There were no souvenir shops, no lines of tour buses waiting to drop people off. When we walked the streets, it felt like every single head turned to watch us. And not in the friendly welcome way, more like in the way you'd stare at something that doesn't belong. I remember saying something about it to Marina, but she brushed it off with a laugh. "They're just curious," she said. "They don't see outsiders often." Maybe she was right. But something in my gut felt off. Still, we leaned into it. Marina spoke decent Croatian, and she loved striking up conversations with strangers. She had this ability to get people talking, even when they didn't want to. So, we spent our first day exploring side streets, eating at small cafes, and listening to stories from locals. It felt authentic, raw, like we were seeing the real Croatia, not the version in travel brochures. But that night, lying in our room, I couldn't stop thinking about the way people looked at us. Their stares weren't soft, weren't curious. They were heavy, almost suspicious. The next day, Marina wanted to try this tiny seafood spot a local had mentioned to her. "It's supposed to be amazing," she said. "Authentic and cheap. Perfect for us." It was about a 15-minute walk from the city center. At first, the streets were lively, but with every block, they grew quieter. The shops turned into shuttered windows, the chatter faded, and by the time we reached the restaurant, I realized we hadn't seen another tourist in over half an hour. The place didn't look like much. A handwritten menu taped to the glass, a few wobbly tables, a smell of salt and garlic in the air. But the food, oh God, the food was good. Grilled fish so fresh it flaked off the bone, homemade pasta, bread still warm from the oven, and the wine a whole bottle for just a few euros. We laughed, we ate, we felt like we'd discovered a secret treasure. Then the door opened. 5 men walked in. They looked like they owned the room the moment they stepped through. Rough faces, leather jackets, loud voices. The kind of men you instinctively avoid no matter what country you're in. They sat just a couple of tables away from us, talking over each other, smoking between bites, their laughter harsh and sharp. At first, I didn't think much of it. I was too wrapped up in the meal, too wrapped up in Marina's smile. But then, her smile faded. She wasn't laughing anymore. She wasn't even looking at me. Her eyes were locked past my shoulder, her face drained of color. Then she leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to go. Right now." The way she said it, it wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't panic. It was certainty. I didn't argue. I tossed way more money on the table than we owed, grabbed her hand, and followed her out. She walked fast, almost dragging me along. Her grip was iron on my arm. I finally whispered, "Marina, what is going on?" Her voice trembled when she answered. She told me she'd overheard their conversation. They weren't just talking casually, they were making plans about us. They mentioned separating us, they described what they wanted to do to her. And one of them, someone named Tomas, was supposed to handle me. My stomach dropped. I felt cold all over. That's when I made the mistake of looking back. The men had followed us out. They were standing in a line, just staring. And then, without a word, they started walking. Not casually, not slowly. They were following us. We ran, not a jog, not a fast walk, a full sprint through narrow, empty streets. The sound of our shoes slapping against the pavement echoed off the walls. Behind us, I could hear them. Their footsteps, chasing, heavy, relentless. Every corner we turned felt like a gamble. Were we running deeper into danger, or closer to safety? 10 minutes, 10 of the longest minutes of my life. My chest burned, my legs screamed, but we didn't stop. Not until the streets opened up. Not until we heard cars, voices, life. And just like that, they stopped, 2 blocks back. The men stood still, watching us, not chasing anymore, not yelling, just watching. We collapsed onto a bench in the main square, lungs burning, hearts slamming against our ribs. Marina's eyes were glassy, though she tried to hold it together. We ducked into the nearest cafe, desperate for safety. That's where an older man at the next table leaned over. He'd overheard us speaking English. He asked if we were okay. We told him what happened. His reaction sent a chill straight through me. He shook his head and muttered one word. Fools. Not cruel, just blunt. He told us no outsiders should ever walk into that neighborhood. When Marina described the restaurant, his expression hardened. He said we'd stumbled into a place tied to organized crime. The kind of place locals avoided too. Then he looked at us and said, flatly, "You're lucky. Very lucky." Then he paid his bill and left. Just like that, we didn't argue, we didn't linger. We spent the rest of the night locked inside our room, curtains drawn, counting down the hours until our flight. To this day, I thank God Marina understood the language. If she hadn't heard those words, if we'd hesitated for even a minute longer, I don't want to imagine what would have happened. That trip changed me. It killed whatever naive part of me believed that nothing bad could happen if you just went with the flow. And for Marina, I think it stole a little bit of her fearless edge. But we got out, and that's something I'll never stop being grateful for. If this story gave you chills, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss more terrifying true stories like this one.